Do we have everyone you think, Jordan?
So I'm just going through my list. Yes, I think this is our group.
Okay, I just put in the link to the note catcher. And I'm going to also do a screen share. I have 1,000 windows open, so don't judge me. Is this large enough for all of you to see? All right, so I actually want to get the first order of business of having someone volunteer to work on the summary sheet so that we don't forget that, so that we don't run out of time and we don't forget that. As a reminder, that role is to help Jordan and Brian pull together a what will probably be, I imagine, somewhat of a one-pager, maybe 1 or 2 pages summary of the discussion of the subcommittee. It may not even include specific recommendations, but really what this discussion led to in terms of potential benefits, potential barriers, what might be necessary components. And then I imagine that, based on what Jordan shared, that would be about an hour, and then be prepared to sort of present that summary to the whole group in January. And then you'll be supported by the whole group and myself in navigating any questions that come from the task force for clarification of the one pager. So with that, does anyone want to volunteer to serve in that capacity?
Doris, I can do that.
I saw you came off mute. I hope that's what that meant. Thank you, Beth.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm gonna first walk through what we have included in the note catcher. And then I'm actually going to allow a little bit of time for folks to just orient themselves and jot down some notes. We'll spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes on that. And then I want to have some discussion. So I'm trying to accommodate the different approaches that people have. Some people are more reflective and like to take the quiet time to formulate their ideas, but then also want to make sure that we have some rich discussion about what people jotted down, any questions, and then any additional things that we want to add as a whole group. So the first column is really just, kind of to capture so that we have a reference point for who noted a particular comment. And then we move to the potential benefits of implementing the statewide absconder unit. What are 3 key elements that must be present for success in Colorado? So really wanting to take the content that you all had, some of our prior discussion, and really start to customize considerations for Colorado in terms of approach. Looking at the models that have been shared from other states, what are some of the tools and methods that could be effective in Colorado and why? And then also, last time you may recall, we had some discussion around for lack of a better term, sort of the devil being in the details, and some of the things that might have to be true in order for implementation of an absconder unit to be able to happen in Colorado. So some examples of considerations there could be funding, could be different considerations related to geography, like rural versus urban. Other considerations could be the structure of law enforcement in Colorado and the like. So want to capture, again, the things that would have to be true. And then we want to move into what are some of the barriers or potential challenges in implementing an absconder unit. What are the downsides in considering implementation based on the models that we've seen in other states? What are the specific aspects of those models that would not work? Particularly given, local context, but other considerations as well. and then any additional considerations that could present challenges or barriers that we haven't reflected here. All right, thank you, Norma. So Beth, I don't know if you saw Norma's note, but she said she's happy to assist if need be.
Of course.
All right. So we're at 10:33 right now. Let's say we'll give you until 10:45. I'll do a check-in just to see where folks are in jotting down their initial thinking. And then we'll have some discussion, and then I will start taking notes and capturing your thoughts so that we can focus more on the conversation. Brian?
Do you want us to enter straight into this form or just make notes on our own?
No, enter straight into the document.
Okay.
All right. I do see a couple of you still jotting down your thoughts, but I want to make sure that we have a time for some discussion, clarification, and then also I imagine some additional ideas or thoughts will come to mind. Brian, do you want to start us off with what you shared about the potential benefits of implementing, well, just all of the things, what the potential benefits, some key elements, what might be some specific considerations for this approach to be effective in Colorado, and then what would have to be true in order for the absconder unit to be implemented?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think to me the absconder unit, first of all, if you have an issue and you throw stuff at it, you're going to get some success, and there's going to be some sort of heartstrings that are pulled, and everyone's going to feel better. Like, ooh, we cared enough to create this unit. But when we think about prioritizing resources, when we think about the realities of funding and effectiveness, I don't know that a statewide absconder unit is truly going to be effective. I think in order to have it make a substantial impact, the volume of, for lack of a better phrase, officers or agents that are attached to this would have to be pretty significant. They're going to require specialized training if we don't hire with those who already have some of that training. And there's going to need to be ongoing training for them. And then there's also still going to be a lot of other pieces that have to come together. So it's not like this turnkey solution where we just throw some bodies at a problem and see success. I think if we really put a critical eye to this, what we'll find is that law enforcement already has skills and training in this area. And what we need to do, I think that's going to be more effective, is put the expectation on them. I'll highlight some of the alert programs. So we just did the missing murdered Indigenous person alert statewide that told law enforcement, you shall be attentive to this, you shall work on this. And those sorts of expectations can absolutely make an impact. And so we can do something similar when we talk about these kids and highlight it at a legal level, at a legislative level, to say we need these things addressed. And then with that is going to come things around funding, so that we can maybe there can be funding in every agency. They receive funding to support some officers to do this work. So instead of creating,
I want to pause there for 1 second. So you mentioned that there might be an opportunity in lieu of an absconder unit to build on some of the work that's already happening in Colorado, and memorialize that legislatively. I want to put a little bit of a pin in that as another potential recommendation or idea, and just focus our conversation on the absconder unit specifically, so that we can flesh this out. If just so that we can flesh it out.
Yeah, that's fair. So let me back off with all my dreaming and ideas here and focus more on the absconder unit. In order to make this happen, we would need not just officers or agents or whatever title we gave them to conduct the investigations, but there's a lot of infrastructure that's going to be required. They're going to need vehicles and travel tools. They're going to need supervision. They're going to need training. And then we're also going to have to build it in a way that there's a lot of opening of data warehouses. So we have a lot of data silos, especially in the Department of Human Services. And in order for these officers to be successful, they're going to have access to that, to be able to mine that data and figure out where could this kiddo go and be. That the success of this is going to be driven in large part by where these officers are able to be housed and located. And so we'll see less involvement with them in rural facilities than we would be in urban, because the volume is going to be higher. And that's going to be frustrating because we won't see them pay as much attention to these lower level areas. We see that in law enforcement on a regular basis. The areas that have less crime see less cops. And then they get upset because they're like, we don't see any cops in our neighborhood. Well, you don't have any crime in your neighborhood. Well, when are we going to get cops? Well, when we start seeing more crime there. And then there's already crime, and they're frustrated because there's crime in their neighborhood, and we're behind the ball. And that's just how these things always sort of unfortunately go. I don't see a lot of downsides other than I don't think the effectiveness is going to be as great as we want it to be. So when we go to put a lot of money into it, we will find that we're spending more than we could in other realms. But I don't think that you can really credibly say that there's a downside to dedicating resources to these kids that are fleeing. If there is a downside, I think there might be that perception, like, oh, the runaway police are coming after me, or I've got to hide from the runaway police. But I don't think that's going to be notable. We have that now. We have law enforcement that kids are already running from when they know that they're a runaway.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could just add kind of to the context too, as we go through this exercise. Again, I just want to remind everyone, if part of the recommendation needs to be, we recommend funding or an analysis for that funding, that's what we can be. So I just want to be careful we're not like using funding barriers as a way not to put something forward here. I'm just going to put that out there. If the recommendation needs to come forward with, we should consider what funding would look like. I kind of would love to elevate us to that point, because I don't want to use that as a barrier to what could be something implemented in the state. And so, Brian, if I could just focus, because I want to make sure I'm answering everything we're going through, funding aside, and just answering that very, very first question, which is, what could be the benefit, right? Because I think if you could expand on that from a law enforcement perspective, because we will get into challenges, I still just want to know what could be the benefit from an absconder unit like this. And Doris, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good.
So I guess it is hard. It is hard for me to kind of separate this thing. Like, if I told you that you could have a mechanic in your garage 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you would all say, yes, I'll have a garage mechanic. And when I pull in, he'll always take care of my car. But there's all these pieces that go with that. Like, who's going to train him? Is he going to be the garage mechanic that works on 1950s cars and can't work on my 2021 Mazda? Like, how do we, all of the infrastructure just cannot be ignored. And so my argument against that then is the funding, because like, we could, with infinite resources, have that garage mechanic who goes to training when you're at work so that he can always work on your latest car. But that's not realistic. And so that's where I'm struggling, is I feel like the absconder unit is, you can't say that having people dedicated to this problem that we're supposed to be working on is a bad idea. Like, that sounds really horrible. Like, I don't want to be the guy that says, no, we should not pay attention enough to dedicate funding to it. But I also want to balance out the resources. And I think the most effective use of our resources is going to be taking people who already do this, who already have an infrastructure in place, that already have supervisors and vehicles and investigative experience and training programs nationwide to participate in, and having them like expand their duties, which they already can do, is going to be a more effective use. So it is hard for me to say like, oh, well, there's a negative side to absconder unit, because I don't know that there really is, other than
outside of the resources part, the funding piece. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think your note here about the data piece and knowing the volume of children and youth that we're talking about, I think that could be a critical component in helping to inform, like, how big of a unit would we be talking about? Because that like, it could be really high, or when you don't know what that number is, then it becomes harder then to figure out what exactly the resource commitment would need to be in the corresponding funding. Beth, I see that you had your hand up, and then Brian.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, Brian, you were talking primarily that this would be based out of law enforcement. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on why you think it should be based out.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I think that the idea, as I see it thrown around from the Texas model, is that it's not based on law enforcement. So I just want to kind of separate that. I am recommending, I am suggesting that the efforts, the absconder response, be based out of law enforcement. I say that with this idea that we already have law enforcement statewide. We don't have to build that infrastructure on which region is going to be managed by who. We already have it statewide. We already have, by law, a relationship between law enforcement and human services that's already in existence. There are certainly places, for example, Denver, where there could be more value in a dedicated group of people, whether they be law enforcement or otherwise, to respond. But when we look at some of these smaller counties, their volume is going to be lower, that having a person dedicated to that county or even that region might be really unmanageable and again, expensive. So if we build on the existing law enforcement infrastructure, knowing that these officers have the access to missing persons training, they have the access to vehicles, supervision, and general management, and they also can enforce certain areas of law that can help with their investigations. I think that law enforcement is a more effective place to place this response. The other side to it would be recreating that wheel in a lot of ways, because I think that in order to get effective investigations, you're going to need people who can do good interviews, both in the field, sometimes in person. You're going to need people that have access to public records databases, search, law enforcement databases, human services databases. So we've got a lot of other barriers. So that's why my idea with law enforcement is that it feels like we're taking a group that already is most of the way there. They conduct similar investigations on adults or runaways who are not, in our wheelhouse with this program, and we're just adding to it as opposed to recreating.
Yeah, I guess I just think first and foremost, identifying like what's the purpose of the absconder unit, like what's the end goal. And I think building it out of law enforcement, although I hear you, Brian, in the sense of like having people that are trained, you're very much so talking about investigations. And then it's like, well, what investigation? I think that's where we need to have like a multidisciplinary approach with, if we do come in contact with the youth, they're not in trouble, right? And so if we were to come in contact with them and they make a disclosure that a crime has occurred, they've been a victim in some way, how can we streamline? But I don't think keeping it with law enforcement is necessarily the most trauma-informed approach when dealing with youth who are running away. And I can just speak to, my own experience in law enforcement for over 12 years. Like, you have people who are in their specialties, and a majority do get very little training when it comes to engaging with youth, and working with colleagues who are like, I don't want to deal with that kid case. And if it's this quickly, okay, we're just picking them up and relocating them or getting them back to the facility or wherever they ran from. I think we're then missing the intervention piece of how do we prevent this youth from running again? And what's the message there of like, if law enforcement's taking it, are they in trouble?
I think that's a great point, and I certainly don't want to minimize anything around the prevention or the what should happen after we find them. I'm really focusing on the finding. Once we have located that child, how we respond after that moment, I think is a much different question. But finding the child, I think, is much more effective when you put the tools that we have, that law enforcement already has in place, sort of out there. So I think this goes to kind of like you and I's conversation with NCIC unit the other day. Like, why wouldn't we give your unit the access to this breadth of this wide-ranging tool when our goal is to make this connection And so rather than like segregate and create an absconder unit that's like over here, which is what I heard Texas do, they're over here. And then they sometimes try to build these informal relationships with law enforcement. I'm suggesting that we have a more like in law enforcement response and expand on the relationship between law enforcement and other places to help support it.
Brian, I want to make sure I'm hearing you then. Are you suggesting creating a unique curriculum for current law enforcement to act as a response unit when youth run away from care? Or is that what you're suggesting?
I don't know that I'm going to go so far as to say a unit, because I think every county is going to be different. Like volume is going to matter a lot. If we looked at some of these small, like Lincoln County, and we tried to create a 12-person absconder unit, they would be twiddling their thumbs a lot. I do think that we should have some structured curriculum for law enforcement officers that are tasked with this. I think that those officers should receive or be expected to have certain training in their response. And then, of course, funding to support all that.
Okay. And again, I get funding is there. I still want us to be creative and bold up front, and then I'm going to back out. And I know, Norma, you've had your hand up for a long time, but I really, really want to emphasize, what would the benefits be in this world where we're not inhibited by funding? Like, I know it's hard. I know we're all in government for a very long time. I get it. It's my first thought, but I really want to see us get creative and put that into play. I don't want us locked down by this question of funding, because that's one of the directives, is what funding may be necessary. And if we're just inhibiting ourselves from that, we're not going to get to these bold and innovative recommendations. So again, this is just where I'm coming in and trying to make sure we're actually hitting the task in the directive, which is to consider these things in isolation of resources and then bringing that piece in. And then Norma, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And Jordan, I'm sorry,
no
I want to,
yeah.
Can I just jump on the training in regards to law enforcement? Instead of it just being isolated to like, here's the assigned team, for us thinking broadly, I think we mandate for posts, they need to have CIT built into the academy versus based on the officer or the department's initiative. And then a curriculum surrounding, and not only building in CIT in the academy, but then like mandating like every 2 years, here's a refresher. And then specifically training surrounding engaging with high-risk youth in that piece. So I'm sorry, Norman.
No, I appreciate
No. It's totally fine, Beth. I really just wanted to echo what you were saying, Beth, around just trauma-informed approach and intervention. And so I think I'm still sort of stuck on I guess needing to define what the purpose of this, intervention would be, right? Is it just to take a child back to, because that's what happens now, right? When we call law enforcement, they find the kid, they just bring them back to the facility, and then that's that. And so I think it's for me, at least in the way that I think it's important for us to first define, what do we want this group of people to do? Is it to intervene? Because if so, like you were saying, Beth, I'm not sure that law enforcement is the best place for that to happen. I think that children, good, bad, or indifferent, see law enforcement as not their friend necessarily. And so I think regardless of training, in my opinion, it's going to be really hard for kids to trust. And so, I think we just need to figure out first, what do we want this group of people to do? Is it to just take them back to the facility? Are we talking about, and I know that we can't talk about a larger picture of this today, but is it that, part of this recommendation would be to build something or to, create something that would help whomever finds these children to take them to a certain place, or do a certain intervention so that we can understand why they're running and figure out what we're going to do about that so the cycle doesn't continue. I mean, normally when kids run from placement, normally it's not just one time. And so what we want to do is interrupt that sort of pattern of behavior for them. So I don't know if that all makes sense. I'm just kind of looking at my notes and throwing stuff out there.
No, it's just, I hear you, and I think that is something to define. And I think this is the meeting where we throw out ideas on what the unit would do. Like this is literally the 30 minutes where we need to do that.
And just to clarify to your question, Norma, the absconder unit would be the unit that, like, in this framework, they would respond when a youth runs away from care, and whatever intervention is recommended as part of that unit. So whether that's, doing a standardized assessment, trying to understand what are the underlying reasons that they ran, doing some prevention work to prevent future runs, that taking a multidisciplinary, whatever that was, it's the response team that would intervene when a youth runs away from care. And then this group would then sort of like flesh out, okay, so if we went down that path, what would we want that unit to, who should make up that unit, and what would we want that unit to do?
Yeah. Okay. So then I guess I would say, Brian, with all due respect, and I don't mean to, whatever, but I don't know that this would, in my opinion, at least, I don't know that it would make sense to house it with the police necessarily. And I think there would need to be a number of different ways in which this unit could respond. So Doris, you just mentioned a number of different things, right? And I would say that all of those are important, and these units would need to, or these people, whomever, would need to be trained in a number of different interventions, so that depending on why the child ran, or depending on what child we have in front of us, there's a, sort of a toolbox, a menu of options that these folks could choose from in terms of the intervention that would best fit that child.
Thank you. And Brian, I see you've had your hand up for a minute, and then we'll come to you, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thanks. I just really wanted to briefly say, and I know I started in the other subcommittee, so this discussion might have already happened, but just to go back to the resource that was prepared, where we looked at DC, Tennessee, and Texas. I know we had the speakers come from Texas, but so that'll be the most like fresh in our minds. But we don't only need to think about their model. And Texas did lean into like all of their absconder units were former law enforcement employees. But we can look at DC and Tennessee just as two other examples where it's not so focused on the law enforcement connections. They certainly work in cooperation with law enforcement, but just as folks have been saying, like there are different ways to go about thinking about what this could look like. And especially at this point in the process where we're just thinking about potential benefits right now, and then separately we can think about potential negatives. Thinking about, the population doesn't have to be so centered around law enforcement if Colorado decides that that's not the direction they move in.
Yep. Thank you, Brian. Elizabeth?
So I'm just wondering if it would look something similar to what we have with the crisis response teams that I'm familiar with, where it's partnered with right now a therapist and a law enforcement officer. And then they come out to, safety calls, mental health calls. Would it look something like that, where we've got somebody that, is law enforcement and can help locating the kid, but also someone that can immediately intervene and start doing assessments and take over once we.
Sorry, thank you for that, Elizabeth.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think it could look however this group decides it could look. So I love the idea of, trying to look at other models, other approaches that could be adapted to this population. Becky?
Thanks, Doris. And I agree with a lot of things that have been said, and especially Elizabeth's last point about having a mental health professional involved. I know we respond to unhoused folks sometimes with a social worker involved as well. And I think it's a better informed approach. I just want to be clear, and I put it in a couple of these boxes, but I would really like to see us think about this not as a gotcha mechanism. And that speaks to, I think, Brian's earlier point about kids being afraid of law enforcement for every reason that they should be. So not gotcha, but more of a resource to providers of how can we help stabilize, how can we keep safe and make this a good thing and not a gotcha thing. And lastly, I really want to make sure we maximize the opportunity to collect data and use it in a meaningful way. And so that's why I put the point about partnering with folks from higher education. So maybe DU's Action Lab or whichever universities are studying this kind of stuff to try to make sure that whatever we're learning from this can inform better practice down the road.
Awesome. Thank you.
This is Norma. I also wonder if there's a way to also like maybe partner with hospitals. There are times where, we may need to have a child who is having, a significant mental health issue in that moment to, go into a hospital setting to stabilize, to just maybe even for their own safety. And having something like that available right now, we really don't. I mean, they have to be actively homicidal, suicidal, psychotic, whatever, in order to be able to be hospitalized. And I'm not saying a long-term hospitalization, but even just for a night or something, to just really be able to assess their mental health and whether or not they are, in a place to make good decisions for themselves. And I mean that in a really specific way. I mean, adolescents in general usually are in a place to make good decisions. So we know that. But I mean, just safety wise, and use the time while they're there to really assess what their needs are. And really, give everybody just a minute to try to stabilize this child. I'm not sure if that makes sense or not, but I do know that it's not available to us now to do something like this.
Thank you. Brian?
So I feel like, I don't know, I feel like we're getting disjointed because when I think of the absconder unit, I'm picturing boots on the ground searching for children. And maybe that's just my law enforcement response sort of like point of view. I agree fully with all of the support resources that need to happen, but I've been viewing all of those things as preventing the next run. And so how do we intervene when the child is gone? What do we do to find the child? That's sort of where my focus has been. Once we have the child, what do we do to support them is a separate thing. And I think it's important. And I think the work that the other subcommittee is doing is probably more important than this work in many ways, because that's how we keep from having this crisis that this committee is talking about. And so I agree fully with all of that. I really just want to sort of reiterate that my thought on this law enforcement centric sort of intervention or like response to the missing child is not in a vacuum. It's not in this like I want to ignore all the supports that come with preventing the child from running in the future. I'm just trying to focus like how do we put the most resources most effectively. What tools do they need to be able to go out and get that child out of that danger zone that we believe them to be in this moment? And then all of the how do we keep them safe? How do we address what happened? Like all of that stuff's important, and I don't want to ignore it, but I just feel like the law enforcement centric response to that immediate moment is much more relevant.
Thank you for that, Brian. I mean, I think that your approach that centers law enforcement would be to have the absconder unit narrowly focused on responding and finding the child. So, and whether it ends up in your mind being an absconder unit or like just a function of law enforcement, but it's really focused on child locate function. And I think that there will be additional opportunities to also focus on, policies and practices and where those then connections to other services and supports might be. And I think that for some, it sounds like, Beth included, that, the unit that she contemplates is one that is both focused on locate, but also then what does that engagement with that youth look like, which then does touch on, I think, some of the policies, approaches, and intersections with other, services, connections to other services and supports that child or youth might need. I think that can be a part of this conversation because it is, for those who seek to take a multidisciplinary approach to this particular function, it is both a locate and an intervention kind of approach with that team. So I think that it is part of this conversation, but I think that there will be another opportunity to go deeper into policies and practices once children or youth run away from care. Beth, then Jordan. Becky, you still have your hand up. I didn't know if it was still up or if you had more that you wanted to say. And then Elizabeth.
Thank you. I'm bad at technology. Thank you, Doris.
No problem.
Yeah, I just think that first interaction is really crucial, right? If it's a negative interaction, it's not going to be successful. And I think it has to, you summed it up, Doris, like it has to be this locating the youth, but then, using that as an intervention piece of like talking through, getting to the why the youth left. And then how do we prevent it again? Because we can all agree like these youth are running multiple times. And so maybe it's something where, building out a safety plan with them, knowing that, okay, they're going to run again, but what can we do to build out and that they're willing to agree to keep them safe if they were to run again. And so really needing that multidisciplinary approach of not just simply locating the youth, because locating the youth and putting them back is not going to solve this. And really utilizing the safety planning and skill building for these youth. And I like Norma's suggestion in regards to the hospital on like high risk level cases if they're in that immediate crisis, but even maybe having just a safe place to go for maybe they're not needing the mental health side to talking with a clinician, but needing a safe place to stay for like 1 night, 2 nights, as opposed to going right back to the facility where they just ran from.
Yeah, I totally agree, Beth. And I don't want to go too far down that road because I'm not sure if we're supposed to here or not. but I agree. We need to have a conversation about what are the options for kids to go to when they run, if going back to the facility is not in their best interest or the best interest of the facility either, right? Like sometimes when kids come back to facilities or law enforcement brings them back, they're fine in front of the police officer, but then later, they hit a staff person or, whatever, right? And so, we need to think of providers as well and those facilities and the children that are in the facility, right? To make sure that they're not witnessing something like that happen, because that's traumatic for them. So yeah, I definitely would like the idea of thinking about, where else can we have kids go for just like a timeout to really just think things through, be able to talk to somebody, and figure out that why that you just talked about, Beth. I think that's really key.
Thank you, Norma. Elizabeth? I think I said you next, Jordan, but I'm gonna go to Elizabeth first and then I'll come back to you.
Oh, I just a couple of things. So, I sort of agree with Brian about law enforcement, but then if we train all of our law enforcement officers, to look for these kids and to give them some trauma-informed training, then how do we make sure that you know, each officer is putting these kids as priority, because a lot of guys out there, you know, they might have the training, but they still aren't going to think runaway kids are as important as whatever else they're doing. And that's just, I mean, it's that way in most professions, but like, how do we get people who are really compassionate about kids to take on this searching for kids and retrieving them? Which is why I think it has to be a team, a dual team of social worker or mental health provider or somebody. And then, of course, as you guys are saying, where they're going to go, if it's not safe to take them back to the facility. Is it immediate? Is it hospitalization, or is it a shelter? And I think that's on the radar, isn't it? A couple of sessions down the line.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we'll have an opportunity to further flesh out the then what. What are the other options for kids?
Okay, so that was just my 2 cents on the notes.
Thank you. Jordan and then Brian.
Yeah, that was all. I was just trying to, April is when we're going to have our subcommittee meeting on the then what, as Doris just said, those temporary placements. So there's lots of space here. And then two, just because I hear kind of the questions floating, just plugging this in everyone's ear on what a recommendation can look like. We fully intend that these will be page-long recommendations if we head in that route. So I just want to give everyone that little bit of breathing room as we're thinking about this. So it could look like, and I'm not suggesting this, but like the task force suggests that the General Assembly consider the implementation of a statewide response unit. That assessment should include potentially training of law enforcement, hospital, like multidisciplinary. So I just want to give you guys that breathing room. It does not need to be this single definitive thing. We can add components of what needs to be included for this to be successful. I think that might just give us a little bit of breathing room so we're not so focused on that one yes or no function.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jordan. And I think two things, and then I'll come to you, Brian. One is that we know that this is complex, right? Like, so the idea that it's like, oh, that's the solution that we know will fix the thing, does not exist. And so there could be the opportunity for a multi-level approach where, you know, for communities, you know, sort of like for larger communities, having an absconder unit that is this multidisciplinary approach that's a dedicated team might make sense. And then an approach for, you know, jurisdictions or counties or areas of a certain size, then implementing a kind of having I'm literally just making this up, like memorandums of understanding between these partners and defined roles for these things. So there could be a framework that could be implemented in smaller communities where they don't have the number of incidents that they would have to respond to, but that ensures that there is a consistent kind of approach when kids or youth run away. So, you know, I think that there's lots of opportunity here to flesh out something that really could be that could be made to work in Colorado. Brian, and then we'll come back to you, Brian.
Well, I just wanted to.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, wrong Brian.
I was like Brian, and then we'll come back to you, Brian. Then I was like, oh, it might not be clear. Brian Cotter, you, and then Brian Kelly.
Okay. So I just wanted to kind of flesh out on what the idea, because Elizabeth brought this idea, like some of the cops aren't going to be responsive, and I agree fully. I think that there is a need, there's a driving need that this task force can capitalize on to have more detailed, more focused missing persons investigations generally. And those are the detectives that I'm talking about. Those are the investigators, the law enforcement officers that I'm talking about, the ones that have more of a focused response. And in fact, in Colorado Springs, they're not even sworn officers at all. They're civilians who have some experience, but they're supported by this law enforcement infrastructure that already exists. And, you know, to your point, like, yeah, we need to have a close partnership. We should have a close partnership. Law enforcement and human services should already have a close partnership. I feel like there's generally a human services like friction with law enforcement, and that needs to go away. Like we are going to be more effective with our kids when we get those close relationships. And so my view is that these officers help instill this culture of training. So yes, we need to include it in academy training, but we have these specialists that have this more sensitized training about why is this valuable? How does this benefit our community? We have this command structure that supports that. This is not a back burner topic. And part of the reason that part of the way we help all that come along is that legislative declarations, those laws to help facilitate. Like there's things I can't learn from human services because of privacy issues, but that would facilitate missing persons investigations. So legislature can help address some of those. So I agree that if we just take that rookie officer out of the academy and say, there's a runaway kid, we're going to get the response that we've always seen and that we're all frustrated with. We can do better. I don't think we have to do better by walking away from centuries of infrastructure that has developed and supported these investigations in the past. We can do better by making those infrastructure tools better.
Thank you. BK, I'm just gonna make up a nickname for you.
I'm only gonna respond to that from now on. I just want to say, just based on what you had said, Doris, about the that we could also consider things like regionally differential approaches, or this is just remembering Texas. I was astounded to learn that Texas, I think, has 220 counties, but so they're regionally based rather than building things into the county infrastructures. So that's also just something worth considering. It doesn't necessarily need to be like plug and played into every county has to respond in a certain way, because the quantity, the demand for those services is going to be different, which would drive different workforce needs. So just something to consider.
Thank you, Brian, or BK. All right, we just have a few more minutes. I want to make sure that we didn't go through all of these, but I think that, and I tried to take notes as folks were adding to what they put in the note catcher. Are there any other, as we think about the opportunity that lies with an absconder unit approach, any other benefits or key elements that would have to be necessary, or approaches from other states that you think are worth capturing? And then if not, want to make sure that we capture the challenges or downsides. I know that funding is one that folks named. Again, we don't want that to be the automatic barrier, because one of the tasks of the task force is to identify what funding would be necessary in order to implement a recommendation. So, using Jordan's language, and I know Stephanie's language about really being bold, not allowing the potential funding piece to disrupt our creative thinking. When we look at the models of other states, some of the things that would not work, again, noting the particular challenges around having a unit that is doing investigatory work for locating outside of law enforcement. We've talked a little bit about the pros and cons of that. Some additional considerations, looking at legal tools, penalties, funding for existing law enforcement efforts, etc. Some of the downsides of potentially taking, we've talked about a law enforcement approach. Thank you, Elizabeth, for naming that in your circumstance with your son, that this would not have benefited your child, and thinking about ways to maximize funding in other ways. And then a couple of notes here around making sure that we define what the intervention would be, and then who the right person or who the right people would be for that particular function. Any other potential downsides that we haven't already talked about? Elizabeth?
So I guess I was just kind of pulling that note from the conversation that I was reading from the previous session. But, theoretically, if we had teams in the Denver area who were immediately responding to runaway kids, I mean, what would that have looked like? So when the facility put out the runaway report, which we don't know when that happened, right? He left the facility around 4 something in the afternoon, I think. And I didn't get notified until 9:37, which the accident happened at 9:34 or something. So sometime between in that 4-hour period, they did put in a police report. So would this unit have immediately responded and started looking for my kid? I mean, we don't know really what the response time would even look like in the metro area. So whether or not it would have helped Timmy, I don't know.
Yeah.
If it was something they knew they were going to that facility to take runaway reports, would that initial team have gone to take the report and immediately started looking? That could have been beneficial, but we just don't know.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, so first of all, I think I'm gonna just say this, that I think that it is very presumptuous and in some ways maybe even offensive to suggest that this would not have made a difference for your child and your family. I think, again, as we think about the potential for an approach like this group could make the recommendations that if there is an absconder unit, the absconder unit is charged to respond within X amount of time, and the response looks like this, which could include, all of the necessary notifications, including notification of family members if the child is not, or if the parents are not already aware, if they ran from a facility and the facility didn't make them aware that it's a response. So, I mean, this can be what this group decides it can be. And, I think having your voice is especially important because I think we want to consider what would have made a difference in your instance, and how could an approach like this or any other approach have resulted in a different outcome. I think that is part of the task of this group. Beth?
Yeah, I think to that point, we have previously talked about, with this unit doing a screening before that placement to identify level of risk and breaking down kind of a tiered response. To Doris, your point of like, if this is identified as a high risk youth, like requiring that immediate response upon getting that report in. So I think that's something we should discuss as well.
Yeah, and we will definitely have a chance to discuss that as we flesh out like what does the response, or what should the response look like. Jordan, and then Elizabeth.
Yeah, I just wanted to tie in. So that kind of screening, both pre and post recovery tool, Beth, is also what prevention is talking about now as well. So I know it's a little bit, we have a ton of moving parts around, and I'm just going to take it on myself to remind us where they all are, but they are going to work on that. And so these things may it all came out of my head, so it's only fair, but they're going to intertwine, and we'll put them together at the next large meeting.
Awesome. Thank you, Jordan. Elizabeth?
Yeah, so one of the key parts of that immediate response is, I think it was Brian or somebody that was telling us, when the police report is taken, then immediately it's updated to the national database for missing kids. But in my situation, I'm not sure that happened, whether that was computer input or whatever, because when the accident happened, it was in Wheat Ridge. He was reported missing in Denver. So for 20 some hours, they were unable to identify my child by any resources. And I'm assuming that the lieutenants or whoever was handling the investigation in Wheat Ridge was aware of that national database, right? But they were unable to identify Timmy, and they had to post on Facebook pictures of him in his hospital room. And somebody that he went to school with, their parent in another state, identified him, So I think, making sure that all of that information is input into the correct systems in a timely manner is super crucial. So I don't know if that's something this team would handle as well.
Listen, it's wide open. It's wide open what we can add in the recommendations. Thank you. Anything that is top of mind that we have not yet included in thinking about the potential opportunities and what would need to be true in order to implement an absconder unit in Colorado, and then any additional challenges or barriers? Anna?
I think we've kind of talked about this kind of globally, but just to kind of rename it is, I think the potential of an absconder unit, and we have to flesh out what that looks like and what the response is and the tools to identify what that response level and all of those things. And I totally hear that, but it seems to be one piece, and it's one piece to like the overall standard response that I feel like we might want to explore in that like global. So like in all of these different discussions of like the therapeutic needs or the immediacy response, the notifications within the systems, I feel like that's not specific necessarily to the absconder unit, but those pieces are the outlying pieces that go within the standardized response that may or may not also include the absconder unit.
Yes, and we will have an opportunity to flesh out what is the standardized response.
I guess that was just kind of my point, that I feel like we're talking about like all of that, yes, within like specifically just the absconder unit, right? But just like identifying, and I feel like a lot of these other parts might not be specific to the absconder unit, but might be incorporated within the other discussions of identifying the
Yeah, I think I hear you. You got lower for some reason for me.
I'm sorry. I'm on my
that's
phone.
better.
I covered my speaker. I apologize. Just kind of speaking of like that, all of those other points, I feel like it would be very difficult for the absconder unit to touch on all of that. So the other aspects will continue to be incorporated within that standardized response, and just kind of trying not to put it all on just the one entity of the absconder unit, because it seems to be a lot of different moving parts.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And yes, well, I think that is an important consideration, that, when we talk about this absconder unit, like it really is that initial response when a child or youth runs away. And then, all of the other elements of the response, including, whether there's an assessment that gets done, whether there's a temporary placement that is located, that's not the place that they ran away from. All of those things are functions that likely would fall outside of that initial response to locate the child, ensure that they're safe, ensure that they're not further traumatized by, whoever locates them. But then there's the then what? That is a part of that standardized response, which includes whatever policies and practices. And I think identification to the extent possible of who does what, that will be a part of that subsequent conversation.
If I may, I wonder if just a thought that I have in regards to it is the absconder, the potential or possibility of the absconder unit. I totally hear it and we would have to like flush out a lot of different aspects of it. But I wonder if it should be like solely identified as the initial response, because we don't necessarily know that we have fully fleshed out, right? Like how that responder unit may or may not respond, right? And I think that there's a number of responses that could potentially occur prior from the facility being their responses, from specific boots on the ground law enforcement responses, right? Like if we're doing an absconder unit, could they respond out within an hour, right? I feel like that might be a little bit unlikely. but potential. Whereas if we're making a law enforcement notification of a kid missing, they could have like a different immediacy response, where if we take the Texas model, and right, I'm just using the Texas model, where they kind of got it on a more of a delayed and then like flushed out social media response, right? So I guess I'm just saying, I don't know that we flushed out that the absconder unit would be the initial response, or just the seek to locate. An initial response might be in other forums from a multi-agency digging in, if that makes sense. Am I making sense? You look like I'm not making sense. So
no, I hear you, Anna. And again, that's where those pieces on the prevention committee are going to come into play. So I put a link to the roadmap in the chat. It's a slide deck Trace went through this morning. Kind of look at those pieces. They're very broad pieces and they will come together. But basically that prevention piece is what's going to address a lot of that. And then in our February meeting, we're going to come in, we're going to talk about that standardized response protocol that we started earlier this year with that grid and what that may look like, and then how we're going to integrate that with the screening tool discussion that the prevention subcommittee is working on now.
Thank you. All right, we do have to go back to the main room. I always worry that there's not going to be enough discussion, and then there's a lot of discussion. So I think Brian, if you have something really, really important that you can say in 30 seconds, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll say it real quick. I will tell you that the whole conversations until Doris, you just commented about this immediate response. Like, I don't think that any absconder unit is going to practically respond to a runaway in that way. We're going to have to lean on law enforcement for the very first response, for that, oh gosh, do we have a crisis level? Like, let me put a variety of people out searching right now. I have viewed the absconder unit as a investigative response. Like, they would receive the information, hopefully in a timely fashion, whatever we define out, and they would begin their response and searching. But I think even an hour is an aggressive. Like, I can't get negotiators and SWAT teams out in an hour, let alone a runaway response. So
that's fair enough. Thank you. All right, we're gonna go back to the main room.
How do we get back to the main room?
So we have to leave this Zoom and go back to the other Zoom. Jordan put in the chat the link to the other Zoom. So if you click on that link, you'll get a prompt that says leave and join new Zoom or something to that effect. And then you can just click yes.
Yes, Norma, I'll stay here until you're over in the new one.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank you all. Great discussion.